I had experienced such a brightness and such an unbelievable feeling of happiness. I felt as if I was home. That's why I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay there, where I felt so secure and comforted, in a place of light and love. But I was taken back very roughly, and that made me feel very bitter and sad. But I also knew that I had to go on living and make the most out of it.
Frau Nickolay, Sie hatten im Alter von 16 Jahren einen Motorradunfall.
Ms. Nickolay, at the age of 16, you had a motorbike accident with severe injuries, among them traumatic brain injury. This tragedy changed your life completely and eventually led to an attempted suicide. What exactly happened?
When I was 16, I was living with my mother. I used to live with my grandma before that. Since I was working during the school holidays, I asked a friend who had a motorbike if he would let me drive it with him on the back seat. He didn't agree in the beginning, but eventually he let me drive. The accident occurred when I was thrown against a heavy railroad barrier. I got an immediate traumatic brain injury and, additionally, I suffered from amnesia.
You couldn't recall anything about the accident at first?
No, not at all, at first. But then I started remembering some bits and pieces. For instance, I am sure that I remember that I started panicking when I realized that the railroad barrier was coming down and I didn't know how to shift into a lower gear anymore. The next thing I remember is that my relatives were standing around my bed in the hospital and told me what had happened to me.
How did you register that you are suffering from amnesia?
When I was back in school, I realized that I couldn't take in most of the learning material that was taught by the teacher. I also had a hard time focusing, and eventually I realized that I had lost so much of my memory that I couldn't simply continue with school anymore. It was not possible to continue my life where I had left off. I was in neurological therapy as well, and I even had a convulsive seizure due to the injuries from my accident. Therefore, I was given medication. I have met some nice people at the time that supported me, but I was an active part in it. I had to go and seek support for myself in order to be able to finish high school in another town. And I got very lucky because of that. I even got some additional education as well, until I met my husband.
What exactly was the trigger for your attempted suicide?
Actually, I didn't feel understood by my family. I was accused of being stupid, I was called being dumb by some people, so I had to explain that I had an accident and how they dared to say such things. I didn't feel understood at all. I was getting more and more depressed until I finally saw no other way out. I took a lot of sleeping pills and locked the door to my room. But then there was a banging against the door and the people from the ambulance were there to take me to the hospital. I was treated there and my stomach was pumped out. In this moment, I was actually very sad because I've had such a wonderful experience and everything was full of light and I had felt so liberated and free when I was laying on my bed and when the sleeping pills started to work.
What exactly did you experience?
I had experienced such a brightness and such an unbelievable feeling of happiness. I felt as if I was home. That's why I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay there, where I felt so secure and comforted, in a place of light and love. But I was taken back very roughly, and that made me feel very bitter and sad. But I also knew that I had to go on living and make the most out of it.
Were you surprised about that near-death experience? Did you expect such an experience because of your religious upbringing? Or did you just want to get life over with, put an end to everything?
Yes, I was extremely surprised. I just had the intention to draw the line because the circumstances became unbearable to me. But then I had such a beautiful experience that I didn't want to go back to life at all. But throughout the time, this made me realize that one has no right to end its life, that no matter how hard it seems, one has to live through it, one has to endure it, and actually be even grateful for it, because in reality, it is a gift to be able to experience all of it. And it was definitely a gift that I couldn't leave back then.
What exactly gave you that idea that it's not right to end one's own life?
That was an inner voice, an intuitive or an inner wisdom that tells me that this is the truth. It comes from within. When you're relaxed and not trying too hard, if you just listen to your inner voice and what it tells you.
Your near-death experience has convinced you that life is something beautiful and something precious, and also that you would never do such a thing again as your attempted suicide.
Exactly. And that I am supported and protected no matter what happens. And that's something that my mother used to tell me when I was a little child. If I couldn't fall asleep, she told me to feel as if I was as light as a feather, and I fell asleep. That was such a beautiful feeling, and there was this close person, and there was my autosuggestion that made me able to do that.
You say that you have recognized your true home. Is that what you describe with light and love?
Yes, and that is something I can do consciously if I feel bad or if I have a hard time. For example, I had a yin and yang symbol within me that I could visualize, and if I had a hard time, I could let it turn to the positive side. It was spinning within me, approximately around the area of my solar plexus.
I read something you said on the internet. An illness that lasted for 12 years, a terminal illness according to the physicians, has awoken me up inside and healed me. What exactly happened?
When I was pregnant for the second time at the age of 38, I had bleedings out of my left breast for quite some time, a couple of months during the pregnancy. I assume it was because I have been hit there by accident. And it didn't stop after the birth. I thought it would stop at some point, but it didn't. It has hurt, and the breast didn't give as much milk as the other one either. Even though I had surgery done that was supposed to stop the bleeding, it has started again shortly afterwards. All in all, I had had these bleedings for around 12 years. I tried everything, even herbal remedies and so forth. Nothing helped. Maybe it was helpful that I kept telling myself that I had to stay alive. I have to be there for my kids. I have to survive for them.
What exactly was the negative medical prognosis?
At the doctor's appointment, I heard the doctor talking to his colleague in my presence that when the breast kept bleeding, she won't make it much longer. Obviously, I went to another one after hearing that. Then, at another appointment, one doctor told me not to think about my sick breast all the time and not to put any herbal remedies on it anymore. She recommended that I shouldn't think of my illness anymore. But even though I thought it was an interesting hint, it didn't help me either. What eventually did help was when I started to ask non-physical beings for help. I had faith that I would find healing there. Once, I told one gynecologist that I'm not going to the hospital to have a mammography screening done, that I don't agree with this procedure. And I think it is very important to stand up for your own convictions, even though you might be made fun of. I told her no, I can support the healing process on my own.
And then the healing process was successful?
Yes, the healing process took place, and it's all healed even until today.
And after the healing, you had refrained from solid food for some time, and you also lived an ascetic life.
Yes.
How did that come about?
That was kind of a spontaneous decision. I have read books about nutrition through light or living on light, and I wanted to try that. Even out of thankfulness for my salvation. And for 7 days, I have not eaten anything and I have not been drinking anything. That was something quite borderline. But I have really done that, and there are people who can testify that. Because sometimes people doubt that I have actually done it.
You've also written a book about your story. It's entitled The Light Within Me, a story of survival.
Yes.
What was your motivation for that?
Back then, I had nobody to talk about it at all. My children were not open to it, and they were also not the right people for such a discussion. So I started to write down what had happened, and when I had finished the book, I have sent it to a couple of publishers. And Andrea Schmitz said yes. That's interesting. We're going to publish it.
You've also found that you have the ability to help in the healing process. Are you a healer?
I am always trying to motivate people in a positive way. Sometimes people need their illness to attract attention, and then it doesn't get accepted when I tell them, you can heal yourself. Because everyone can actually heal himself. But it is not good to be pushy about it and say, I must heal myself or I must heal this other person. Because there are barriers sometimes. If you want it too much, it won't happen. To tell you another instance with our dog, my son once told me, look at his paw, he's bleeding there for some time now. And I just looked at it and I saw that there was a deep cut. I took his paw and held my hand over it, and I didn't think about it for some time. I just let my energy flow into his paw, and when I checked it again, the cut was gone.
Das heißt, sie motivieren andere Menschen dazu.
So you are motivating people to heal, but you are not a healer under every circumstance.
No.
What happens when we heal? How does it work for you?
I have the impression that I am becoming one with the divine consciousness. But I am not allowed to demand anything. It's just as it is. It's something that flows.
You are not allowed to guide it with your own willpower?
Yes.
You are not only an author, you also write poems and short stories, and you are a painter as well. Is there, apart from the fact of your talent, a reason why art is so important to you?
I had a life crisis in 2013, and because of that, I felt a strong wish to start painting again. As a child, I had an uncle who was a painter, and he used pencils and watercolors. And even though he didn't motivate me to paint, I always loved watching him when he was painting. After this crisis, I painted a lot of pictures in 2013, 14, and 15, and I also held exhibitions. Right now, this creative phase has flattened out. But it's possible that this creativity comes back. Maybe on a totally different level, but I'm open to that, and I'm ready to be surprised.
What concept of humankind do you have? Is there something that you feel is important for all of us? And what is the meaning of life in your eyes?
I think that we should trust each other more than we do now, and that we are allowed to live without fear. That is very important. And that everyone is an individual and everyone has the right to present himself the way he is. Of course, there might be some people who want to attack us for that or mock us because of that. But we should not be afraid of those things, because when we are authentic, when we are ourselves, that's when we are in the flow with divinity, I believe.
You are also, if I'm informed correctly, a social worker. Are you able to benefit from your life experiences? Can you bring them to your work?
Yes, that's very easy. After an initial phase where people are a little bit skeptical when you step into their privacy. But I'm convinced that I'm winning people's hearts because they don't have to pretend to be someone else. Everyone is allowed to be himself, and that is very beautiful. And then I try to go from there and try to be a positive influence on them. I try to stabilize them so that they are happy with themselves and the way they are. Because most of the time people pretend and try to show only their good sides. Eventually, that doesn't always work out and they are under a lot of tension. I tell them they are allowed to be themselves when I am around. That is nice for me and for everyone else.
What's your attitude towards death?
I think I have still got some things to do on Earth, some tasks to fulfill. But I am also not afraid of death. I think that death is not the end. I think that we can expand our consciousness and that we can be born again and grow closer and closer towards the divine light. And I long for that very much. But I also think that we must live in a very aware manner to reach this goal. For instance, we should be very aware of what we're saying when we are not in a good mood, because it all gets registered.
You think that's the deal, to lead a more conscious life?
Definitely. To live consciously and to take responsibility for oneself.
Ms. Nickolay, thank you very much for your openness and for sharing your personal experiences with us. And all the best.